The centuries roll backward. The empire breathes again. The travertine limestone of the Colosseum catches the last golden light of a Roman afternoon, its 4 stories of arched entrances rising against a sky that has watched over this city for nearly 3,000 years. The scent of dust and warm stone fills the air, and somewhere beyond these walls, the ghost of a civilization that once commanded the known world stirs back to life. This is Rome. Not the Rome of postcards and tourist maps, but the Rome that began as a handful of oval huts with thatched roofs on the Palatine Hill, where Latin-speaking shepherds tended their flocks above the marshy ground of what would one day become the Forum Romanum. From those humble origins around 753 years before Christ, a settlement of pastoralists absorbed the alphabet, the engineering, and the gods of their Etruscan neighbors, and began a journey that would reshape the entire Mediterranean world and echo across every century that followed. This series tells that complete story, from the very first post holes dug into Palatine soil to the moment a teenage emperor named Romulus Augustulus surrendered his purple robes in 476 of the Common Era. Every chapter of this extraordinary civilization will unfold in sequence: the age of 7 kings, the revolutionary birth of the Republic, the titanic clash with Carthage, when Hannibal crossed the Alps with war elephants and Rome lost 50,000 soldiers in a single afternoon at Cannae, the rise of Caesar, his crossing of the Rubicon, and his assassination beneath 23 stab wounds on the Ides of March, the golden age of Augustus, who found a city of brick and left it sheathed in white Carrara marble, the Colosseum's 100-day inaugural games, the Pantheon's perfect unreinforced concrete dome, still standing after 2 millennia, the daily lives of ordinary Romans in 6-story apartment blocks, the public baths, the grain dole feeding 200,000 citizens, and then the long, complex transformation as plague, military anarchy, economic collapse, and the pressure of migrating peoples slowly reshaped an empire that had believed itself eternal. What makes this story matter is not merely its scale, though at its peak Rome encompassed 5 million square kilometers and 70 million souls. What matters is that the foundations of the modern world were laid here, among these stones. Every nation that calls itself a republic, every legal system built on codified precedent, every language descended from Latin, every city planned on a grid, every arch and dome and aqueduct owes something to the civilization that rose from shepherd huts beside the Tiber. By the end of this journey, the full arc will be clear, not just what happened, but how an entire world was built, how it flourished, how it fractured, and how its legacy survived in ways its founders could never have imagined, carried forward by the Eastern Roman Empire until 1453, embedded in the vocabulary of every modern democracy, and written into the very concrete beneath our feet. If these complete journeys through ancient civilizations speak to something in you, please subscribe so you do not miss our next exploration. Each week we bring you the full story of a lost world, told from its first breath to its lasting echo. Let us begin our journey on a hilltop above the Tiber, where the first fires are lit and Rome begins. The Tiber moves slowly here, brown and heavy with silt, curving through a landscape of low hills covered in coarse grass and scattered oak. Mist clings to the river valley in the early morning, settling into the marshy lowland where 7 hills rise from the plain of Latium like the knuckles of a half-closed fist. It is sometime around the 10th century before the Common Era, and on the summit of one particular hill, the Palatine, thin columns of smoke drift upward from a cluster of oval huts. These are small structures, no more than 4 or 5 meters across, their walls made of wattle and daub packed over wooden frames, their roofs thatched with straw and reeds. The post holes that anchor them into the soft volcanic tufa will survive for nearly 3,000 years, waiting to be uncovered by 20th century archaeologists who will recognize in these humble impressions the earliest physical evidence of habitation on the site that becomes Rome. The people who build these huts are Latin-speaking pastoralists, tending sheep and goats on the hillsides, growing emmer wheat and barley in small plots along the river terraces. They bury their dead in simple pit graves with modest offerings, coarse pottery, bronze fibulae, miniature clay vessels shaped like their own dwellings. These funerary hut urns, discovered in the Forum necropolis, preserve in fired clay the exact profile of the homes above. The pitched roof, the central ridgepole, the low doorway facing away from the prevailing wind. The Palatine is not chosen by accident. Its steep sides offer natural defense. The Tiber provides fresh water and a route to the salt flats at its mouth near Ostia, where the precious mineral is harvested and traded inland along paths that will one day become paved roads. The river crossing here, at the Tiber Island where the channel narrows around a small rocky outcrop, makes this location a natural junction point between the Etruscan territories to the north and the Greek colonial settlements spreading along the southern coast. To the northwest, barely 30 kilometers distant, the Etruscan city of Veii already flourishes with painted tombs and sophisticated metalwork. Further along the coast at Cerveteri, the vast necropolis of Banditaccia holds thousands of carved burial chambers arranged along streets of the dead, their interiors painted with scenes of feasting and music. These Etruscan neighbors possess an alphabet adapted from Greek colonists, advanced hydraulic engineering, and a religious system of elaborate divination. Their influence seeps steadily into the Latin settlements, in pottery styles, in building techniques, in the names of gods. The marshy valley between the Palatine and the Capitoline Hills lies waterlogged and uninhabitable, a breeding ground for mosquitoes, thick with reeds. Centuries will pass before this swamp is drained and paved to become the Forum Romanum. For now it serves as a burial ground, the boundary between the living on the hilltops and the dead in the low ground between. Other settlements dot the surrounding hills, the Esquiline, the Quirinal, the Caelian. Each carries its own small community of herdsmen and farmers, sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing for grazing land and water access. Slowly, across generations, these scattered villages begin to coalesce. Shared festivals draw them together. Common defense against cattle raiders binds their interests. Intermarriage weaves family networks across the hillsides. Later tradition will compress this long, gradual process into a single dramatic act. A founding by Romulus in 753 before the Common Era, complete with fratricide, sacred boundaries, and divine omens. The legend of twin brothers nursed by a she-wolf and raised by shepherds carries within it a kernel of cultural memory. That Rome begins not with kings or conquerors, but with pastoral people, close to the earth, watching their flocks on a hilltop above a muddy river. The bronze she-wolf that later centuries will cast in gleaming metal remembers this origin, even as the city it represents grows beyond all recognition. Something is gathering here among the huts and hearth-fires, still unnamed, still unaware of what it will become. The village becomes a city in stages, each reign adding something that the one before it lacked. Tradition names 7 kings across nearly 2.5 centuries, and while the precise details of the earliest reigns dissolve into legend, the archaeological record confirms the transformation they represent. What begins as a cluster of thatched huts on the Palatine emerges, by the late 6th century before the Common Era, as a monumental city-state with stone temples, paved streets, and engineered drainage, a place that has absorbed the knowledge of its neighbors and made it unmistakably its own. The first king, Romulus, belongs more to myth than to history, but the second, Numa Pompilius, carries a different kind of memory. Roman tradition credits him with establishing the religious calendar, the priestly colleges, and the sacred rituals that will bind civic life to divine order for centuries. Whether or not a single figure accomplishes all of this, the attribution reflects a genuine phase, the formalization of religious practice as an instrument of social cohesion. Temples begin to rise, modest at first, their wooden frames dressed in painted terracotta in the Etruscan manner. It is the Etruscan influence that reshapes everything. Beginning with the 5th king, Tarquinius Priscus, traditionally dated to around 616 before the Common Era, Rome falls under rulers with deep connections to the wealthy Etruscan cities to the north. The consequences are visible in the ground itself. The marshy valley between the Palatine and Capitoline hills, long used as a burial ground, is drained through an extraordinary feat of engineering, the Cloaca Maxima, a great sewer channel lined with stone that carries water into the Tiber. The valley floor hardens, is paved, and becomes the forum, the civic heart of the city. Markets gather here, assemblies convene. The space that was once swamp becomes the center of Roman public life. On the Capitoline Hill, the most ambitious project of the regal period takes shape. The Temple of Jupiter. Optimus Maximus rises on a massive platform of tufa blocks, its triple cellar dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. Etruscan craftsmen model the terracotta decorations, acroteria along the roofline, antefixes with painted faces, a great terracotta statue of the god himself driving a 4-horse chariot atop the pediment. The temple is enormous by the standards of its age, its footprint rivaling anything in the Greek or Etruscan world. The 6th king, Servius Tullius, reorganizes the population itself. His reforms divide Roman citizens not by clan, but by wealth and residence, creating a census-based system of military obligation and political participation. The Comitia Centuriata, the Assembly of Centuries, ties voting power to the capacity to arm oneself for war. A circuit of fortification walls, later tradition calls them the Servian walls, begins to define the city's physical boundaries in rough-cut tufa quarried from nearby ridges. But kingship carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. The 7th and final king, Tarquinius Superbus, rules as a tyrant. He completes the great temple on the Capitoline, dedicated in 509 before the Common Era, but his reign is remembered for arrogance and cruelty. The Roman aristocracy, the patrician families who have grown powerful under the monarchy, reach a breaking point. Around 509 before the Common Era, they expel the last king and abolish the institution of monarchy entirely. In its place, they establish something unprecedented, a republic, a system of shared power with two annually elected consuls, each holding authority for a single year, each capable of vetoing the other. The very word king becomes an insult in Roman political vocabulary, a stain no ambitious man will willingly accept for nearly 5 centuries. The city that the kings built now belongs to its leading families, and they intend to keep it. The new republic is fragile, and its enemies know it. The Etruscan king Lars Porsena of Clusium marches south almost immediately, bringing an army against the city that has just expelled his kinsman. The details of what follows are wrapped in legend. Tales of a one-eyed bridge defender named Horatius, of a young man thrusting his hand into fire to prove Roman resolve. But the archaeological and literary record suggests that Rome suffers a genuine military humiliation in these earliest years. The city may have been occupied briefly, its independence hanging by a thread. What matters is that the Republic survives, the dual consulship holds, power transfers peacefully from one pair of elected magistrates to the next, year after year, and this rhythm of annual succession becomes the heartbeat of Roman political life. The Forum Romanum in these decades is a modest space. Simple stone buildings line its edges, their walls of dark, volcanic tufa quarried from nearby hills. The Comitium, the open-air assembly ground at the Forum's northwest corner, is where citizens gather to vote and hear disputes settled. There is no marble here, no gilded ornament. The Republic's architecture reflects its values: austerity, function, collective purpose. Wooden shutters hang over shop fronts. A small circular structure marks the shrine of Vesta, where sacred fire burns without interruption. The Regia, once the residence of kings, now serves the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest. The monarchy's physical spaces are repurposed, not destroyed. But the Republic's greatest threat comes not from foreign armies, it comes from within. The patrician families who overthrew the king have claimed all political and religious offices for themselves. The plebeians, farmers, craftsmen, soldiers who fill the legions and till the fields, find themselves excluded from power, crushed by debt, subject to laws they have no hand in making. By 494 before the Common Era, the tension breaks. The plebeians withdraw from the city entirely, marching to the Sacred Mount northeast of Rome in a collective act of secession. They refuse to serve in the army. They refuse to work. The patricians, facing the collapse of both military defense and economic production, are forced to negotiate. The result is the creation of the tribunes of the plebs, magistrates drawn from the common people, whose persons are declared sacrosanct, whose single word of veto can halt any act of government. 1 year later, in 493 before the Common Era, the consul Spurius Cassius negotiates a treaty with the Latin League, the confederation of neighboring Latin cities. The Treaty of Cassius establishes a military alliance of equals, binding Rome and the Latins to mutual defense and shared spoils of war. It is a pragmatic arrangement born of necessity, for the Aequi and Volsci hill peoples press down from the Apennines, raiding the lowland farms of Latium with relentless regularity. For 4 decades the Republic fights, negotiates, and slowly stabilizes. But the fundamental grievance remains. Roman law is unwritten, held in the memories of patrician priests and magistrates who interpret it as they see fit. A debtor has no text to cite, no precedent carved in stone. Around 451 before the Common Era, a commission of 10 men, the decemviri, is appointed with extraordinary authority to codify the law. They study, they deliberate, and tradition holds that they send envoys to Athens to examine the laws of Solon. By 450 before the Common Era, the result is inscribed on bronze tablets and erected in the Forum for all to read. The 12 tables cover property, inheritance, debt, assault, boundaries, funeral rites, and the rights of fathers over families. The language is blunt and archaic. The penalties are harsh, but the principle they establish is revolutionary. The law belongs to everyone. It is visible, fixed, and public. No magistrate can twist an unwritten custom in secret. The bronze tablets standing in the Forum catch the afternoon light, and every Roman who passes can see the words that bind patrician and plebeian alike. The Republic has given itself a spine of written law, and upon that spine an entire civilization will learn to stand. Yet the bronze tablets change less than they promise. The 12 tables codify existing custom, and much of that custom favors the families who have held power since the expulsion of the kings. Patrician clans still monopolize the consulship, the major priesthoods, and the Senate's inner circles. The law is now visible, but the hands that interpret it remain the same. Within a year of the tablet's installation, the tension breaks open again. In 449 before the Common Era, the consuls Lucius Valerius Potitus and Marcus Horatius Barbatus push through a set of laws that mark the first real structural concession. The Valerio-Horatian laws confirm that resolutions passed by the plebeian assembly carry binding force, that the tribunes of the plebs are sacrosanct, their persons inviolable, any hand raised against them cursed by religious sanction. The narrow streets of the growing city carry the news from the Forum to the workshops on the Aventine, where tanners and potters and grain merchants absorb its meaning. The tribunes are no longer merely protest leaders. They hold a constitutional veto. 4 years later, in 445 before the Common Era, the tribune Gaius Canuleius forces through legislation that strikes at the deepest boundary between the orders. The Canuleian law permits marriage between patricians and plebeians. Until this moment, such unions are legally void, the children of mixed couples denied inheritance rights and civic standing. The law does not merely open a legal door. It dissolves the fiction that patrician blood carries a sacred quality that plebeian blood would contaminate. Families begin to merge across the old divide, slowly, cautiously, but irreversibly. The patrician response is strategic retreat dressed as compromise. Rather than open the consulship itself, the Senate creates a new office, the consular tribune, or tribunus militum consulari potestate, a position carrying consular authority, but lacking the full prestige of the title. Plebeians become eligible. Between 444 and 367 before the Common Era, the office appears and disappears from the magistrate lists, sometimes replaced by traditional consuls when patrician factions regain leverage. The Forum's growing collection of temples and public buildings witnesses decades of this procedural warfare, each side maneuvering within the framework of law rather than resorting to open violence. The economic pressures sharpen the conflict. Small farmers, many of them plebeian, fall into debt after seasons of military service pull them from their fields. Creditors, often patrician landholders, seize their property through the harsh provisions of the 12 tables themselves. The nexum, or debt bondage, reduces free citizens to a condition barely distinguishable from slavery. The sacred mount northeast of the city, where the plebeians first withdrew in 494 before the Common Era, remains a potent symbol. The threat of secession, of the common people simply walking away from the city and its wars, is the plebeians' most powerful weapon, and the patricians know it. The resolution comes in 367 before the Common Era, with the Licinian Sextian laws, championed by the tribunes Gaius Licinius Stolo and Lucius Sextius Lateranus after a decade of political struggle. The legislation mandates that one of the two consuls must be a plebeian. It limits the amount of public land any single citizen can hold to 500 jugera, roughly 330 acres, striking directly at the great estates swallowing peasant farms. It restructures debt repayment terms. Lucius Sextius Lateranus himself becomes one of the first plebeian consuls the following year. The rostra in the forum, that raised platform from which magistrates address the assembled citizens, now hears voices that would have been silenced a century earlier. The struggle is not over. Plebeians will not gain access to the dictatorship until 356, to the censorship until 351, to the praetorship until 337. But the architecture of shared governance is in place. Rome has discovered something that its neighbors have not: a method of absorbing internal conflict into institutional change, bending without breaking, transforming grievance into legislation. The city on the Tiber grows, not despite its divisions, but through the slow, grinding process of resolving them. The mechanism works. Rome absorbs its own tensions and turns outward, and the Italian peninsula becomes the proving ground for an ambition that no longer fits within the 7 hills. The Latin War erupts in 340, when Rome's oldest allies demand what the plebeians have only recently won: equality. The Latin League, a confederation of cities sharing language, religion, and blood ties with Rome, insists on full partnership. One consul must be Latin, half the Senate Latin. Rome refuses. 2 years of fighting across the familiar plains of Latium end at the Battle of the Vesuvius near Campania in 338, and the Roman response to victory reveals a political genius more consequential than any battlefield triumph. The Latin League is dissolved. Each city receives a separate treaty with Rome. Some granted full citizenship, others partial rights without the vote, still others bound as allies obligated to provide troops but forbidden from treating with one another. Divide and incorporate. The formula will define Roman expansion for centuries. South of Latium, the Apennine highlands belong to the Samnites, a confederation of Oscan-speaking mountain peoples whose territory stretches across the rugged spine of central Italy. The First Samnite War, beginning in 343, is brief and inconclusive. The second, from 326 to 304, nearly destroys Rome. At the Caudine Forks in 321, an entire Roman army is trapped in a narrow mountain pass and forced to surrender, marching beneath the yoke in ritual humiliation. The defeat stings for generations. Rome responds with infrastructure. In 312, the censor Appius Claudius Caecus commissions the Via Appia, a road of fitted volcanic stone stretching south from Rome toward Capua, straight as a surveyor's line across the Pontine marshes. It is the first of the great roads, and its purpose is military: to move legions quickly into hostile territory, to bind conquered land to the capital with ribbons of engineered stone. The Third Samnite War culminates at Sentinum in 295, where Rome faces a coalition of Samnites, Gauls, Etruscans, and Umbrians, nearly every people of the peninsula united against the common threat. The Roman victory is decisive. By 290, the Samnites submit, and Rome's dominion reaches from the Arno to the heel of the boot. Only the Greek cities of the south remain independent. Tarentum, the wealthiest of them, calls upon King Pyrrhus of Epirus, a kinsman of Alexander the Great, who crosses the Adriatic in 280 with 25,000 soldiers and 20 war elephants. At Heraclea that same year, the elephants shatter Roman cavalry formations, and Pyrrhus wins the field. At Asculum in 279, he wins again, but his losses are catastrophic. The victories that bear his name become a proverb for triumph indistinguishable from ruin. By 275, Pyrrhus withdraws to Greece, and Tarentum falls. The peninsula is Roman now, stitched together not by a single conquest, but by a web of roads, colonies, and graduated alliances. Latin colonies planted at strategic crossroads serve as garrisons and markets simultaneously. Allied cities keep their local customs, but march when Rome commands. The legionary camps that dot the landscape follow identical grid plans, the Cardo and Decumanus crossing at right angles, the Principia headquarters at the center, portable cities stamped onto foreign soil. Samnite hill forts of rough limestone stand abandoned on their ridgelines, their defenders resettled in the valleys below. From the terraced Greek theatres of Magna Graecia to the Etruscan painted tombs of the north, Rome has absorbed an entire peninsula of cultures, and it has done so through a system that offers just enough inclusion to prevent permanent rebellion. The roads radiate outward from the forum like spokes from a hub, and along them move soldiers, traders, colonists, and tax collectors. The Italian Confederation that Rome commands by 275 numbers, perhaps 3 million people under arms when fully mobilized, a reservoir of military manpower unmatched in the Western Mediterranean. Across the sea, Carthage watches. The strait is narrow, barely 3 kilometers of choppy water separating the toe of Italy from the rocky northeastern corner of Sicily. In 264, before the Common Era, Roman legions cross it for the first time, and in doing so, they step into a conflict that will consume 23 years, hundreds of thousands of lives, and the entire strategic balance of the Western Mediterranean. Sicily is no backwater. It is the largest island in the Mediterranean, rich with grain fields and Greek colonial cities, and for more than a century its western half has belonged to Carthage. The Carthaginian presence is unmistakable. Massive stone fortifications at Lilybaeum on the island's western tip, garrison towns along the southern coast, and a network of Punic trading posts that funnel Sicilian wealth back across the sea to North Africa. Carthage itself sits on a promontory overlooking the Gulf of Tunis, its famous circular military harbor capable of sheltering over 200 warships in covered docks arranged like spokes around a central island admiralty. This is a maritime empire built on cedar-hulled vessels and generations of seamanship. Rome, by contrast, has no navy. The war begins over Messana, a city on the strait controlled by a band of Italian mercenaries who appeal to both Carthage and Rome for protection. Rome answers, and the escalation is immediate. Early campaigns on land go well enough. Agrigentum, the great Greek city on Sicily's southern coast, falls after a brutal 7-month siege in 261. But the Romans quickly discover that controlling Sicily's coastline requires ships, and Carthaginian squadrons raid Italian shores with impunity. What follows is one of the most remarkable improvisations in military history. Roman shipwrights reportedly use a captured Carthaginian quinquereme as a model, constructing an entire fleet of roughly 120 warships in approximately 60 days. The vessels are heavier, less maneuverable than their Carthaginian counterparts, but they carry a secret weapon, the corvus, a heavy boarding bridge fitted with an iron spike at its tip. When dropped onto an enemy deck, it locks the ships together and transforms a naval engagement into the kind of close infantry combat at which Roman soldiers excel. At Mylae in 260 before the Common Era, the consul Gaius Duilius leads this untested fleet against a Carthaginian squadron and wins decisively, capturing or sinking approximately 50 enemy vessels. A columna rostrata, a column decorated with the bronze rams of captured ships, rises in the forum to commemorate the victory. Rome is now a naval power, yet the sea proves a merciless teacher. In 255, the consul Marcus Attilius Regulus lands an expeditionary force in North Africa, winning initial engagements and advancing to within a day's march of Carthage itself. The campaign ends in catastrophe. A Carthaginian counterattack led by the Spartan mercenary general Xanthippus destroys the Roman army, and the fleet sent to evacuate survivors is shattered by a storm off the southern coast of Sicily. Ancient sources claim nearly 100,000 sailors and soldiers perish. More fleets are built, and more are lost to storms and battle. The financial and human cost is staggering. The war grinds on through the 250s and 240s, fought across Sicily's mountainous interior and along its coasts. Carthaginian commanders, particularly the gifted Hamilcar Barca, wage effective guerrilla campaigns from mountain strongholds. Rome's treasury empties. By 242, the state can no longer fund new ships, and wealthy citizens finance a final fleet of 200 quinqueremes through private contributions. On the 10th of March, 241 before the Common Era, this fleet meets the Carthaginian navy near the Aegates Islands off Sicily's western coast. The Roman ships, lighter and better trained than earlier efforts, destroy or capture 125 Carthaginian vessels. Carthage, exhausted and unable to resupply its Sicilian garrisons, sues for peace. The terms strip Carthage of Sicily entirely and impose an indemnity of 3,200 talents of silver paid over 10 years. Sicily becomes Rome's first overseas province, administered not through the alliance system that governs Italy, but through a Roman magistrate wielding direct authority. Grain from Sicilian fields flows to Rome. The precedent is transformative. Rome is no longer merely an Italian power, but a Mediterranean one, and the mechanisms of provincial extraction that will define its empire for centuries begin here, on this contested island between two civilizations that are far from finished with each other. The peace lasts barely 2 decades. Carthage, stripped of Sicily and then of Sardinia and Corsica in a moment of Roman opportunism, turns its ambitions westward to Iberia. There, a family of generals, the Barcids, builds a new empire of silver mines and subject peoples, and among them grows a young commander whose name will become synonymous with existential threat. Hamilcar Barca's son, Hannibal, assumes command of Carthaginian forces in Spain in 221 before the Common Era. He is 25 years old. Within a year he besieges and captures Saguntum, a city allied with Rome on the eastern coast of Iberia, and the Second Great War between these civilizations ignites. What follows defies every expectation. Rather than wait for Roman legions to cross the sea, Hannibal marches his army overland, approximately 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, out of Spain, across southern Gaul, and into the Alpine passes in late autumn of 218 before the Common Era. The crossing is catastrophic and astonishing in equal measure. Snow chokes the narrow trails. Rock slides sweep men and animals into gorges. Hostile mountain tribes harass the column. By the time the army descends into the Po Valley, nearly half its strength is gone. But Hannibal stands on Italian soil, and Rome has never faced an enemy arriving from this direction. The victories come in rapid, annihilating succession. At the Trebia River in December of that same year, Hannibal lures a Roman army into a prepared ambush, destroying the better part of 2 legions. The following spring, at Lake Trasimene, he conceals his forces in the morning fog along the lake shore and falls upon a Roman column strung out along the narrow road. 15,000 Romans die in 3 hours. The consul Gaius Flaminius is among them. Rome appoints Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator. His strategy is deliberate avoidance, shadowing Hannibal's army through the hills of central and southern Italy, cutting off foragers, refusing pitched battle. The Romans call him the delayer. The strategy is sound but politically unbearable. A republic built on martial honor cannot stomach retreat. In the summer of 216 before the Common Era, Rome assembles the largest army it has ever fielded, approximately 86,000 men, and sends it south to confront Hannibal near the small Apulian town of Cannae. The result is the single bloodiest day in Roman military history. Hannibal arranges his infantry in a deliberately weak convex center that bows inward under Roman pressure, drawing the legions deeper while his African veterans on the flanks wheel inward and his cavalry sweeps behind to seal the encirclement. The killing takes most of the afternoon. Approximately 50,000 Romans fall on that field. Among the dead are the consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, 29 military tribunes, and 80 senators. The road to Rome lies open. Hannibal's cavalry commander, Maharbal, reportedly urges an immediate march on the capital. The march never comes, whether from insufficient siege equipment, strategic calculation, or the sheer exhaustion of his forces. Hannibal turns south instead, seeking to pry Rome's Italian allies from their allegiance. Several do defect. Capua, the second city of Italy, opens its gates, and communities across Samnium and Lucania follow. The confederation that Rome spent generations building begins to fracture. Yet Rome does not negotiate. The Senate refuses to ransom prisoners from Cannae. New legions are raised from boys and slaves. The Fabian strategy, once despised, becomes doctrine. Roman commanders avoid decisive engagement while methodically recapturing defecting cities. The farmlands of Campania and Bruttium become a wasteland of scorched fields and burned villages, the Italian countryside paying the price for a war neither side can quickly end. Hannibal remains in Italy, undefeated in the field, but unable to force a conclusion, his reinforcements from Carthage arriving too late, or not at all. The war settles into a grinding, devastating stalemate that will consume southern Italy for more than a decade. The stalemate breaks not in Italy, but in Spain. A young commander named Publius Cornelius Scipio, barely 25 years old, arrives in Iberia in 210 before the Common Era, carrying the weight of a family shattered by war. His father and uncle both killed fighting Carthaginian forces on that same peninsula. Within 4 years, Scipio captures New Carthage, the enemy's principal base in Spain, seizing its silver mines, its hostages, and its harbour in a single audacious assault, timed to the retreat of a lagoon tide. By 206, every Carthaginian army in Iberia is defeated or dissolved. Spain, the recruiting ground that fed Hannibal's invasion, belongs to Rome. Scipio returns to Italy and proposes what the cautious Senate resists, carrying the war to Africa itself. Elected consul for 205, he gathers volunteers and veterans, trains them in Sicily, and in 204 crosses the Mediterranean with roughly 26,000 men. The gamble is extraordinary. Hannibal still occupies southern Italy. Yet Scipio understands that threatening Carthage directly will accomplish what 15 years of Italian warfare could not. The North African campaign unfolds with devastating efficiency. Scipio burns the camps of the Carthaginian and Numidian armies in a night raid near Utica, destroying tens of thousands. Carthage recalls Hannibal from Italy. The two commanders meet at Zama in the autumn of 202. Scipio deploys his infantry in columns rather than solid lines, creating lanes through which Hannibal's 80 war elephants charge harmlessly. Numidian cavalry under Massinissa, now allied with Rome, sweeps around and strikes the Carthaginian rear. The army that terrorized Italy for 16 years disintegrates on African soil. Carthage sues for peace, surrendering its fleet, its elephants, its Spanish territories, and its sovereignty in foreign affairs. Rome emerges from the Second Punic War as the undisputed power of the Western Mediterranean. But the East beckons. Philip V of Macedon, who had allied with Hannibal during the war, now threatens Greek city-states that appeal to Rome for protection. Roman legions cross the Adriatic. At Cynocephaly in 197, the flexible Roman maniple formation defeats the rigid Macedonian phalanx on broken ground. Philip surrenders his Greek possessions. 2 decades later, at Pydna in 168, the legions of Lucius Aemilius Paulus annihilate the last Macedonian army of King Perseus. Macedonia becomes a Roman province. The treasures of its royal house fill 150 wagons in the triumphal procession through the Forum. The pattern repeats across the Hellenistic world. The Seleucid king Antiochus III, defeated at Magnesia in 190, retreats beyond the Taurus Mountains. Greek art, philosophy, and literature flow into Rome as spoils of conquest, transforming Roman culture even as Roman power transforms the Greek world. Then comes 146 before the Common Era, a year of calculated annihilation. In Greece, the consul Lucius Mummius destroys Corinth utterly, selling its population into slavery, stripping its bronzes and paintings for Roman collectors. Across the sea, Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of Africanus, completes a 3-year siege of Carthage. The city burns for 17 days. Its surviving 50,000 inhabitants are enslaved. The ruins are leveled. Roman plows score the earth where the harbour once stood. The territory becomes the province of Africa, its fertile grain fields now feeding Rome. Standing amid the flames of Carthage, Scipio Aemilianus is said to have wept, contemplating the fate that awaits all great cities. The Mediterranean, which the Romans now call Mare Nostrum, our sea, stretches in every direction under a single authority. From the Straits of Gibraltar to the coasts of Asia Minor, no power remains capable of challenging Roman supremacy. The republic born on the Tiber, forged in the desperate years of Hannibal's invasion, now commands an empire it has not yet learned to govern. The wealth of conquest poisons the very republic that won it. Across the Italian countryside in the decades following the destruction of Carthage, the landscape itself transforms. Where small freeholdings once checkered the hills of Latium and Campania, vast estates now stretch to the horizon. The latifundia, worked by thousands of enslaved captives from Rome's wars in Greece, Africa, and Spain. Olive groves and vineyards replace the small grain plots that once sustained citizen soldiers. The dispossessed drift toward Rome, filling cramped tenement blocks along the Subura Valley, landless men who can no longer meet the property qualification for military service. In the summer of 133 before the Common Era, a young tribune named Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus stands on the rostra in the Forum Romanum and proposes a land reform bill. The Lex Agraria seeks to enforce an old and largely ignored law limiting the amount of public land any individual can hold, redistributing the surplus to landless citizens. The senatorial aristocracy, the optimates who control vast tracts of this very public land, react with fury. When Tiberius seeks an unprecedented second tribunate, a mob of senators and their clients corners him on the Capitoline Hill. They beat him to death with chair legs and fragments of wooden benches. His body and those of 300 supporters are thrown into the Tiber. It is the first act of organized political murder in the Republic's history. A decade later, his younger brother Gaius Gracchus takes up the cause with broader ambitions. Subsidized grain distribution, road-building programs, jury reform to break senatorial monopoly on the courts, and the extension of citizenship to Italian allies. By 121 before the Common Era, the Senate passes its first Senatus Consultum Ultimum, an emergency decree authorizing the consuls to use lethal force against Roman citizens. Gaius dies in the violence that follows, and 3,000 of his supporters are executed without trial. The precedent is set. Political disputes in Rome now end in blood. The Juguthine War in North Africa, dragging from 112 to 106 before the Common Era, exposes the rot further. Jugurtha, the Numidian king, bribes Roman commanders and senators with such ease that he reportedly declares Rome a city for sale. The war's eventual resolution falls to Gaius Marius, a novus homo from Arpinum with no aristocratic lineage. Marius shatters tradition. Elected consul and extraordinary 7 times, he opens the legions to the landless poor, equipping them at state expense. The new model legionary carries the heavy pilum javelin and the short-bladed gladius, marches with his own supplies, Marius's mules, the soldiers call themselves. These men owe their livelihoods not to the Republic, but to their commander, who alone promises them land upon discharge. Marius crushes the Germanic Cimbri and Teutones at Aquae Sextiae in 102 and Vertellos in 101 before the Common Era, saving Italy from invasion. But his reforms create something the Republic's founders never imagined: private armies bound by personal loyalty. The final rupture comes with the social war of 91 to 88 before the Common Era, when Rome's Italian allies, the Soci who have fought and died in every Roman war for generations, rise in revolt, demanding the citizenship repeatedly denied them. The war kills hundreds of thousands across the peninsula. Rome wins militarily but concedes politically, extending citizenship to virtually all free Italians south of the Po River. The Republic survives, but its institutions now govern a vastly larger body politic, with tools designed for a city-state. The forum where Tiberius Gracchus fell still stands at the heart of Roman public life, its travertine paving stones worn smooth. But the men who now cross it carry ambitions that no constitution can contain. In 88 before the Common Era, Lucius Cornelius Sulla does what no Roman commander has ever done. He turns his legions away from the foreign enemy and marches them south toward Rome itself. The 6 legions under his command, fresh from the social war and bound to him by the personal loyalty that Marius's reforms have made possible, advance down the Via Latina with their standards raised against their own capital. The Senate sends envoys. Sulla's soldiers stone them. The gates of Rome, unwalled and undefended for centuries, offer no resistance. Street fighting erupts in the narrow lanes of the Esquiline, and for the first time, Roman legionaries kill Roman citizens on Roman soil as a matter of military policy. The precedent shatters something irreparable. Sulla drives Marius and his supporters into exile, imposes hasty legislation, then departs for the east to fight King Mithridates of Pontus. In his absence, the Marians seize Rome back. Marius, old and consumed by vengeance, claims a 7th consulship and unleashes a bloody purge before dying in January of 86. For 4 years, the Marian faction holds Italy, while Sulla campaigns across Greece and Asia Minor. He returns in 83, landing at Brundisium, with a hardened army and a methodical fury. The civil war that follows devastates the Italian countryside. At the Battle of the Colline Gate in November of 82, fought literally at the walls of Rome, Sulla's forces slaughter a Samnite army allied with the Marians. Thousands of prisoners are executed in the Villa Publica, while the Senate meets nearby, the screams audible through the chamber walls. Then come the proscriptions. White tablets appear in the forum listing the names of the condemned, men whose property is forfeit, whose lives any citizen may take for a bounty. 1,500 equestrians and 40 senators die in the first wave. Informers grow rich. Estates are confiscated and sold at fraudulent auctions to Sulla's allies. A young man named Marcus Licinius Crassus builds the foundations of an enormous fortune from prescribed properties. The lists grow longer. No legal proceeding, no trial, no appeal. Only a name on a board and a price on a head. Sulla declares himself dictator without term limit, rewrites the constitution to empower the Senate and cripple the tribunes, then does something no one expects. In 79, he resigns. He retires to his country estate and dies the following year. But the lesson of his career proves more durable than any of his laws. Power belongs to the man who commands the legions. The decades that follow confirm this truth repeatedly. In 73, a Thracian gladiator named Spartacus escapes from a training school at Capua with 78 companions. Within months, his revolt swells to an army of 70,000, escaped slaves, dispossessed farmers, the human wreckage of Rome's conquest economy. For 2 years, Spartacus defeats every force sent against him, marching the length of Italy. Marcus Licinius Crassus finally crushes the rebellion in 71, and 6,000 captured slaves are crucified along the Via Appia from Capua to Rome, their bodies left to rot on crosses stretching for 200 kilometers. Meanwhile, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, accumulates extraordinary commands that mock Sulla's constitutional arrangements. He sweeps the Mediterranean of pirates in a single season, then conquers the eastern kingdoms one after another: Pontus, Syria, Judea. He reorganizes the entire eastern Mediterranean, creating provinces and client states, tripling Rome's eastern revenue. His triumph in 61 before the Common Era lasts 2 full days, displaying the wealth of nations. By 60 before the Common Era, 3 men dominate Roman politics through personal armies, personal wealth, and personal ambition. Pompey with his eastern conquests, Crassus with his fortune, and a rising patrician named Gaius Julius Caesar. Brilliant, indebted, and dangerous. They form an informal alliance, the arrangement later historians will call the First Triumvirate. The Republic's institutions still function. Elections are held, laws are passed. But real power has migrated from the Senate House to the military camp, from constitutional office to personal command. Sulla's shadow stretches long across the forum, and the men who now gather there have learned his lesson well. The arrangement works because each man needs the others. Caesar secures the consulship for 59 before the Common Era, pushing through land reforms for Pompey's veterans and tax relief for Crassus's equestrian allies over furious senatorial opposition. In return, he receives what he truly wants, a 5-year command over Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum, with 4 legions at his disposal. It is a platform for war, and Caesar intends to use it. The land beyond the Alps is vast, forested, and fractured among dozens of Celtic peoples. In 58 before the Common Era, Caesar marches north to intercept the migrating Helvetii, defeating them near Bibracte and driving the survivors back to their homeland. Within months he turns against the Germanic king Ariovistus, shattering his forces in Alsace. The speed is breathtaking. Each campaign season brings new conquests, the Belgae in the north, the Veneti along the Atlantic coast, the Aquitani in the southwest. Caesar's dispatches to Rome, polished and self-serving, paint a picture of civilizing conquest. The reality is annihilation on an extraordinary scale. Over 8 years of campaigning, ancient sources record roughly 1 million Gauls enslaved and a comparable number killed. Hundreds of hill forts burn. Entire tribal aristocracies are destroyed or co-opted. The crisis comes in 52 before the Common Era, when a young Arvernian nobleman named Vercingetorix unites the Gallic tribes in a coordinated revolt. Caesar pursues him to the fortified hilltop of Alesia in Burgundy and constructs one of the most remarkable siege works in military history. An inner ring of fortifications 18 kilometers long encircling the town, and an outer ring of 21 kilometers facing outward against the massive Gallic relief army. Trapped between 2 forces, Caesar holds both lines. Alesia falls. Vercingetorix surrenders and is led away in chains, destined to be paraded through Rome and strangled in the Tullianum prison 6 years later. Meanwhile, the triumvirate collapses. Crassus dies at the Battle of Carrhae against the Parthians in 53 before the Common Era, his legions destroyed in the Mesopotamian desert. Pompey, now sole consul, drifts toward the senatorial faction. The Senate demands Caesar disband his armies and return to Rome as a private citizen, which would expose him to prosecution. On the night of January 10th, 49 before the Common Era, Caesar leads a single legion to the banks of the Rubicon, the small river marking the boundary between his province and Italy proper. To cross it under arms is treason. He crosses. The civil war unfolds with devastating swiftness. Pompey and the Senate flee to Greece, unable to muster forces quickly enough. Caesar pursues, and at Pharsalus in August of 48 before the Common Era, his veteran legions shatter Pompey's larger army. Pompey flees to Egypt, where he is murdered on the beach by agents of the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. Caesar follows to Alexandria, installs Cleopatra on the throne, then campaigns through Asia Minor, Africa, and Spain, defeating the last Pompeian holdouts by 45 before the Common Era. Rome belongs to one man. Caesar accepts the title of Dictator Perpetuo, Dictator in perpetuity. He reforms the calendar, replacing the chaotic lunar system with a solar calendar of 365 and 1/4 days that will endure, with minor correction, into the modern era. He extends citizenship, settles veterans on colonial lands, and plans vast building projects. But the concentration of power in a single pair of hands horrifies senators who still remember the Republic's ideals, however hollowed those ideals have become. On the 15th of March, 44 before the Common Era, Caesar enters the theatre of Pompey for a meeting of the Senate. A group of approximately 60 conspirators, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, close around him. 23 stab wounds bring him down at the base of Pompey's statue. The blood pools on the marble floor of a building named for his dead rival. The conspirators rush into the streets waving their reddened daggers, proclaiming liberty restored. The forum is silent. The crowds do not cheer. The republic the assassins believe they are saving has already ceased to exist in everything but name. The assassins have liberated nothing. Within hours of Caesar's murder, his lieutenant Mark Antony seizes the dictator's papers and treasury. The 18-year-old Gaius Octavius, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted heir, arrives in Rome from Apollonia in Illyria to claim his inheritance. He is slight, sickly, unremarkable in appearance. No one takes him seriously. This proves to be the most consequential miscalculation in Roman history. By November of 43 before the Common Era, Octavian, Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus formalize their alliance as the Second Triumvirate, an office ratified by law with powers exceeding anything Caesar held. Their first act is a proscription list of 300 senators and 2,000 equestrians. The names are posted in the forum. Among the dead is Marcus Tullius Cicero, the Republic's greatest orator, hunted down on the 7th of December. His head and hands are nailed to the rostra where he once spoke. The following autumn, at Philippi in Macedonia, the triumvir's legions crush the forces of Brutus and Cassius across 2 engagements in October of 42 before the Common Era. Both conspirators die by their own hands. The last men who killed in the name of Republican liberty lie in Greek soil, and the Roman world belongs to 3 warlords who now divide it among themselves. Antony takes the wealthy east. Octavian takes the west and its volatile politics. Lepidus receives Africa, a consolation that foreshadows his irrelevance. The alliance fractures slowly, then completely. Antony's entanglement with Cleopatra, the 7th of Egypt, provides Octavian with devastating propaganda. Roman senators hear reports of territories gifted to foreign children, of a Roman general conducting himself as an Eastern monarch. Octavian reads what he claims is Antony's will before the Senate, revealing plans for burial in Alexandria. The breach becomes war. On the 2nd of September, 31 before the Common Era, the fleets meet at Actium, off the western coast of Greece. The battle in the narrow strait is decisive. Antony and Cleopatra's ships break through the line and flee south. The bulk of their fleet and army surrender within days. The following summer, Octavian enters Alexandria. Antony falls on his sword. Cleopatra takes her own life. Egypt, the last great Hellenistic kingdom, becomes a Roman province, its grain reserves now feeding the capital. The young man returns to Rome as the undisputed master of the Mediterranean world. but he has studied Caesar's fate. There will be no crown, no perpetual dictatorship, no overt monarchy. On the 13th of January, 27 before the Common Era, Octavian stands before the Senate and theatrically offers to surrender his extraordinary powers. The Senate, carefully prepared, refuses and bestows upon him the title Augustus, the revered one. It is a religious word, not a political one. He accepts the tribunician power, the proconsular command over the frontier provinces where the legions are stationed, and the moral authority of princeps, first citizen. The Republic's institutions remain intact in name. The Senate meets, magistrates are elected, laws are passed. But every thread of real power runs through a single pair of hands. The transformation of Rome becomes physical. Temples of gleaming white Carrara marble replace structures of tufa and timber. The Forum of Augustus rises beside Caesar's Forum, its colonnades sheltering statues of Rome's legendary heroes. The Arapacis, the altar of Augustan peace, displays carved processions of the imperial family in marble relief, so fine that the folds of their togas seem to ripple. A new forum, new roads, new aqueducts, a city rebuilt in stone. Augustus will later record in his Res Gestae, his account of achievements inscribed in bronze, that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He establishes the Praetorian Guard, 9 cohorts of elite soldiers stationed in and around the capital. He fixes the legions at 28, stationed permanently along the frontiers. He creates a professional civil service, a postal system, a police force, a fire brigade. The Pax Romana settled across the empire like a long exhale after a century of civil war. Trade routes flourish, cities grow. The population of the empire approaches 60 million souls. On the 19th of August, 14 of the Common Era, Augustus dies at Nola in Campania, aged 75. He has ruled for 41 years. The Senate declares him a god. The mausoleum of Augustus, a massive circular tomb of travertine near the Tiber, receives his ashes. The Republic is a memory. The empire he built will endure for centuries, shaped entirely by the fiction that it never began. The succession passes not through revolution, but through quiet, practiced mechanism. Tiberius Claudius Nero, Augustus's stepson and adopted heir, assumes power in 14 of the Common Era at the age of 55. He is a seasoned military commander, a veteran of campaigns along the Rhine and Danube, and he inherits an empire that functions with extraordinary precision. Yet the Palatine Hill, where the imperial residence sprawls across terraced gardens and frescoed halls, becomes a place of deepening suspicion. Tiberius governs competently in his early years, maintaining Augustus's fiscal discipline and frontier policies. But the death of his nephew and heir Germanicus in 19 of the Common Era, possibly by poison in the Syrian city of Antioch, darkens the emperor's temperament. By 26 of the Common Era, Tiberius withdraws entirely from Rome, retreating to a cliff-top villa on the island of Capri. From there, perched above the Bay of Naples, he rules through letters and through his prefect of the Praetorian Guard, the ambitious Sejanus, who conducts treason trials that thin the senatorial ranks until his own execution in 31 of the Common Era. Tiberius dies in 37, unmourned. His successor is his great-nephew Gaius, known to history as Caligula, a nickname meaning little boot, given to him as a child in military camps. He is 24 years old. The early months bring relief and generosity, but within a year the reign descends into erratic cruelty and extravagance. Caligula drains the treasury Augustus had carefully built, humiliates senators, and claims divine honors for himself. On the 24th of January, 41 of the Common Era, officers of the Praetorian Guard murder him in a passageway beneath the Palatine. His reign has lasted fewer than 4 years. The guard then finds his uncle Claudius hiding behind a curtain in the palace and declares him emperor. It is an act that reveals where true power now resides. Claudius, 50 years old, limping, stammering, dismissed by his own family as a fool, proves remarkably capable. He reorganizes the imperial bureaucracy, employing freed slaves as heads of departments for finance, correspondence, and petitions. In 43 of the Common Era, he launches the invasion of Britain, sending 4 legions across the Channel to establish a province that will endure for over 3 centuries. Claudius himself travels to witness the capture of Camulodunum. He expands the empire's borders, grants citizenship broadly, and builds the great harbour at Ostia and the Aqua Claudia aqueduct, its towering arches of grey tufa and brick marching across the Campagna toward Rome. He dies in 54 of the Common Era, likely poisoned by his 4th wife Agrippina, who secures the throne for her son from a previous marriage. That son is Nero, 17 years old, guided initially by the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. The first 5 years are remembered as a period of good governance. But as Nero matures, he sheds his advisors, murders his mother Agrippina in 59, and devotes himself increasingly to artistic performance, singing and racing chariots in public spectacles that horrify the aristocracy. Then, on the night of the 18th of July, 64 of the Common Era, fire breaks out near the Circus Maximus. It burns for 6 days. 10 of Rome's 14 districts suffer damage. 3 are reduced to ash. Hundreds of thousands lose their homes in the densely packed insulae. Nero opens his gardens to refugees and organizes relief, but suspicion falls on him nonetheless. He deflects blame onto the small community of Christians in Rome, subjecting them to public execution in his gardens on the Vatican Hill. From the ashes, Nero constructs his Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a vast pleasure palace stretching from the Palatine to the Esquiline. Its octagonal dining room features a domed ceiling that revolves slowly, scattering flower petals. An artificial lake fills the valley, where the Colosseum will one day stand. The extravagance accelerates opposition. In 68, the governors of Gaul and Spain revolt. The Senate declares Nero a public enemy. On the 9th of June, 68 of the Common Era, he takes his own life outside Rome, the last of the Julio-Claudian line. The dynasty Augustus founded has consumed itself in barely half a century. The dynasty's extinction unleashes chaos. In the span of a single year, 69 of the Common Era, 4 men claim the purple. Galba, the aged governor of Spain, holds power for 7 months before the Praetorian Guard cuts him down in the Forum. Otho, his successor, lasts barely 3 months before falling to the legions of Vitellius, who marches south from the Rhine frontier. Vitellius himself proves a placeholder. From the east, the legions of Judea and Egypt proclaim their commander, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, emperor. By December, Vitellius is dead, dragged through the streets of Rome, and thrown into the Tiber. The civil war has consumed nearly 50,000 lives. Vespasian is something new. A man of modest Italian origins from the Sabine town of Reate, he carries no aristocratic lineage, no connection to the Julian or Claudian bloodlines. What he carries is competence. He stabilizes the currency, restores discipline to the legions, and begins rebuilding a capital scarred by civil conflict. His most consequential decision is also his most symbolic. On the site of Nero's artificial lake, in the valley between the Palatine, Esquiline, and Caelian hills, Vespasian orders the construction of a vast amphitheatre. The Flavian amphitheatre rises where a tyrant's private pleasure garden once stood, returning stolen land to the Roman people. Before the amphitheatre is complete, Vespasian's son Titus finishes the brutal siege of Jerusalem. In the summer of 70, Roman legions breach the city walls and destroy the Second Temple, the sacred center of Jewish worship, standing for nearly 6 centuries. The temple's treasures, the golden menorah and the silver trumpets, are carried back to Rome in triumph. The Arch of Titus, erected after his death, preserves this moment in carved relief. Roman soldiers bearing the sacred objects through the streets. The amphitheatre's construction takes a decade. Travertine limestone quarried from Tiber forms the exterior. 4 stories of superimposed arcades rising nearly 50 meters. 80 arched entrances allow 50,000 spectators to find their seats within minutes through an ingenious system of corridors and stairways. Below the wooden arena floor, a labyrinth of tunnels, cages, and mechanical lifts enables animals and scenery to appear as if from nowhere. The structure consumes 100,000 cubic meters of travertine, held together not by mortar, but by 300 tons of iron clamps. Vespasian dies in June of 79, 2 months before catastrophe. Titus, now emperor, has barely settled into power when Mount Vesuvius erupts on the 24th of August. The volcano has been dormant for centuries, its fertile slopes covered with vineyards and villas. The eruption sends a column of pumice and ash 33 kilometers into the sky. Pompeii, a thriving city of 11,000 inhabitants, lying 8 kilometers southeast of the crater, receives the first fall of stones. Herculaneum, closer to the mountain, faces something far worse. Pyroclastic surges, superheated clouds of gas, and volcanic debris traveling at temperatures reaching 700 degrees race down the slopes at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. Death is instantaneous. The cities vanish beneath meters of volcanic material. Streets, homes, bakeries, bathhouses, brothels, election notices painted on walls, loaves of bread still in ovens, all sealed in a tomb of ash and pumice that preserves them for nearly 2 millennia. The elder Pliny, commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum, sails toward the eruption to rescue survivors and dies on the shore at Stabiae, suffocated by toxic fumes. His nephew watches from across the bay and later records the disaster in letters that become the first detailed account of a volcanic eruption in Western literature. Titus dedicates the completed amphitheatre in 80 of the Common Era with 100 days of games. Thousands of animals perish. The arena floor is flooded for mock naval battles. The spectacle announces that Rome has survived civil war, conquest, and natural disaster. Titus himself survives barely 2 more years, dying of fever in 81. His brother Domitian completes the Flavian building program but rules with increasing autocracy, surrounding himself with informers, executing senators on charges of treason. On the 18th of September, 96, his own household servants assassinate him. The Senate condemns his memory, ordering his name chiseled from every public inscription. The Flavian dynasty ends, but its amphitheatre endures, a monument outlasting every emperor who built it. The Senate moves swiftly. On the same day Domitian falls, the elderly senator Marcus Coccius Nerva receives the purple. He is 65, childless, and deliberately chosen as a man who threatens no one. His reign lasts barely 16 months, but in that slender window he performs the single act that defines the next 8 decades of Roman governance. Facing a mutiny by the Praetorian Guard, Nerva adopts the most capable military commander available, Marcus Ulpius Traianus, governor of Upper Germania, as his son and successor. The principle of adoptive succession, choosing the best man rather than the nearest blood relative, becomes the mechanism that produces the longest sustained period of competent rule the empire will ever know. Trajan enters Rome in 98 of the Common Era, the first emperor born outside Italy, his family rooted in the Roman colony of Italica in southern Spain. He is a soldier's emperor, broad-shouldered and plain-spoken, and he turns the empire's energies outward. In 101, his legions cross the Danube on a bridge engineered by Apollodorus of Damascus, a structure spanning over a kilometer on 20 stone piers. 2 campaigns crush the Dacian kingdom of Decebalus, and by 106, the gold mines of Transylvania pour wealth into Roman coffers. The spoils finance the greatest building project Rome has seen. Trajan's Forum rises north of the old Republican Center, its colonnaded plaza stretching 120 meters wide, flanked by libraries in Greek and Latin. At its heart stands the Column of Trajan, a marble shaft 35 meters tall, wrapped in a continuous spiral frieze of over 2,600 carved figures depicting the Dacian wars with documentary precision. By 117, Trajan pushes the empire to its absolute maximum extent, briefly conquering Mesopotamia and reaching the Persian Gulf. He dies returning from the east, and his adopted successor Hadrian immediately withdraws from the new provinces. Hadrian is a builder, not a conqueror. He spends more than half his 21-year reign traveling the provinces, and his monuments define consolidation. In northern Britannia, a wall of stone and turf stretches 117 kilometers from coast to coast, studded with mile castles and turrets, marking the empire's definitive northern boundary. In Rome itself, Hadrian rebuilds the Pantheon, replacing Agrippa's earlier structure with the greatest concrete dome in history. 43.3 meters in diameter, its oculus open to the sky, the interior a perfect sphere of light and shadow. Antoninus Pius succeeds Hadrian in 138 and governs for 23 years of such unbroken tranquility that ancient sources struggle to fill his biography. The empire's population reaches approximately 70 million. Trade routes extend to India and Han China. The legal system matures, with imperial rescripts refining jurisprudence across provinces. Then comes Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher on the throne, and with him the first tremors of what lies ahead. From 161 onward, he faces pressures his predecessors never imagined. Parthian war in the east brings victory, but also catastrophe. Returning soldiers carry a devastating pestilence, the Antonine Plague, likely smallpox, which sweeps the empire from 165 onward, killing between 5 and 10 million people. Villages empty. Military recruitment falters. Along the Danube frontier, Germanic Marcomanni and Quadi pour across the river, penetrating as far as northern Italy. Marcus spends nearly his entire reign in military camps, writing his philosophical meditations by lamplight in a leather tent, composing reflections on impermanence while holding the frontier together through sheer will. He dies at Vindobona in 180, and against the principle that made this golden age possible, he leaves the empire to his biological son Commodus. The age of the best men chosen by merit ends with a father's love for an unworthy heir. The city wakes before dawn. In the darkness of a 6-story insula on the Subura, Rome's most densely packed neighborhood, hundreds of tenants stir on thin mattresses in rooms no wider than a man's outstretched arms. The upper floors, cheapest and most dangerous, sway slightly in the wind. Timber frames creak. The smell of charcoal, urine, and baking bread rises through narrow stairwells with no windows. Fire is a constant terror. Building codes limit insulae to roughly 20 meters in height, yet landlords routinely ignore the regulation. Collapse is common. The poet Juvenal is not exaggerating when he describes the dread of living beneath sagging ceilings, held together with plaster and hope. By first light, the streets fill. Rome at its imperial peak holds more than 1 million people, and the city possesses no zoning, no separation between commerce and residence. Butchers, fullers, coppersmiths, and tanners operate at ground level beneath the apartment blocks. Wagons are banned from most streets during daylight hours, so the pre-dawn clatter of delivery carts gives way to a human flood on foot. Enslaved porters carry amphorae of olive oil and garum from the warehouses at the emporium along the Tiber. Freedmen open their tabernæ, the small shops cut into building facades, selling everything from lentils to terracotta lamps. At the heart of this daily rhythm stands the annona, the state grain distribution that feeds roughly 200,000 male citizens each month. Recipients collect their allotment of free wheat at designated points, carrying it home to be ground and baked or exchanged at neighborhood bakeries where donkeys turn massive millstones in circles worn smooth by years of grinding. The grain ships from Egypt and North Africa arrive at Ostia and are lighted upriver, their cargo the lifeline of political stability. No emperor can afford to let the supply falter. By mid-morning, the Macellum markets overflow. Vendors sell Campanian pork, Gallic cheese, Spanish mackerel packed in salt, and African figs. Prices are haggled in sesterces and asses, the bronze and copper coins that jingle in leather pouches. Social hierarchy is visible in every transaction. A senator in his toga with its broad purple stripe sends a slave to purchase. A freedwoman in a simple tunic selects her own vegetables. The enslaved, perhaps 1 in 3 of the city's population, move through the crowd on errands, distinguished sometimes only by a metal collar etched with their owner's name. The afternoon belongs to leisure, and leisure in Rome is engineered on an imperial scale. The great thermae, the public baths complexes built by successive emperors, serve as the social centers of the city. The thermae of Trajan sprawl across the Oppian Hill, offering heated pools in the Caldarium, tepid waters in the Tepidarium, and cold plunges in the Frigidarium, alongside libraries, gardens, exercise courts, and lecture halls. Admission costs a single quadrans, the smallest Roman coin, making the baths accessible to nearly everyone. Bodies are oiled, scraped with curved bronze strigils, and massaged. Business deals are struck. Gossip circulates. Then come the spectacles. The Circus Maximus, stretching 600 meters between the Palatine and Aventine hills, seats 250,000 spectators for chariot races. 4 factions, the Reds, Whites, Blues, and Greens, command fanatical loyalty. 7 laps around the central spina, with its obelisks and bronze dolphins marking each completed circuit, produce crashes, injuries, and ecstatic roars that echo across the valley. On other days, the Colosseum hosts gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, and public executions. The Roman calendar by the 4th century contains 159 official public holidays, many filled with state-funded entertainment. Night falls and the wagons return. The rumble of iron-rimmed wheels on basalt paving stones fills the darkness. Oil lamps flicker behind shuttered windows. The city never fully sleeps. Its rhythms are not accidental, but the product of deliberate imperial policy. A vast apparatus designed to keep 1 million people fed, entertained, and sufficiently content to sustain the order upon which everything depends. The empire moves on roads. Beneath the wagons that rumble through Roman nights, beneath the marching boots of legions and the hooves of imperial couriers, lies an infrastructure so precisely engineered that sections of it will remain passable 2,000 years after the last Roman surveyor sets down his groma. The road network, at its fullest extent, stretches across 400,000 kilometers of territory, binding Britannia to Syria, the Rhine to the Sahara, in a web of stone and gravel that makes the empire not merely a political concept, but a physical reality. A cross-section of the Via Appia, Rome's oldest and most celebrated highway, reveals the obsession with permanence. Workers excavate a trench down to bedrock, then lay a foundation of large stones called the statumen. Above this comes the rudus, a layer of crushed rock and lime mortar. Then the nucleus, a finer gravel bound with cement. Finally, the surface itself, massive polygonal blocks of basalt, fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot slip between them. The standard width runs approximately 4 2/10 meters, enough for 2 carts to pass. Drainage ditches flank both sides. Milestones mark every Roman mile, inscribed with the name of the emperor who ordered repairs. But water is the greater triumph. Rome alone, by the early 2nd century of the Common Era, receives its supply through 11 major aqueducts running a combined distance of over 500 kilometers. The Aqua Claudia, begun under Caligula and completed under Claudius, travels 69 kilometers from the Anio Valley, much of it underground through tunnels cut by hand through solid rock. Where valleys intervene, the aqueduct rises on towering arcades of stone and brick. In southern Gaul, the Pont du Gard carries water across the Garden River on 3 tiers of arches reaching 49 meters above the riverbed. Its massive limestone blocks assembled without mortar, held in place by precision cutting and sheer weight. The secret ingredient binding this civilization together is concrete. Roman builders discover that mixing lime with volcanic ash from the region around Puteoli produces a substance of extraordinary strength, opus caementitium. Unlike Greek architecture, which relies on post and lintel construction limited by the tensile strength of stone, Roman concrete can be poured into forms, shaped into curves, and set underwater. It enables the arch, the vault, and the dome on scales previously unimaginable. The Pantheon in Rome, completed under Hadrian around 125 of the Common Era, stands as the supreme demonstration. Its unreinforced concrete dome spans 43 3/10 meters, a record that will not be surpassed for over a millennium. The dome's composition changes as it rises. Heavy basalt aggregate at the base gives way to lighter tufa and pumice near the crown, reducing weight with calculated precision. At the apex, the oculus, an open circle nearly 9 meters across, admits a column of light that rotates across the coffered interior as the hours pass. Rain enters and drains through barely perceptible channels cut into the marble floor. These are not isolated achievements, but components of a single integrated system. Roads carry the legions that secure the frontiers, that protect the provinces, that generate the tax revenue, that funds the aqueducts, that supply the cities, that consume the grain shipped across harbors, built with underwater concrete. Roman engineers think in networks. The standardization is deliberate. The same road construction techniques appear in North Africa and northern England. The same pipe fittings in Ephesus and Londinium. Lead water pipes bear stamps naming the emperor under whose authority they were laid, transforming infrastructure into an assertion of sovereignty. The engineering is never merely functional. The Pont du Gard carries water, but its proportions follow precise mathematical ratios. The Pantheon shelters worshippers, but its geometry embodies cosmic order. Every road that arrows straight across a conquered landscape declares that Rome has measured this land, claimed it, and remade it in stone. The empire that measures land in stone and water also measures the divine. Atop the Capitoline Hill, the Temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus presides over Roman religious life as it has since the founding of the Republic. Its gilded roof catches the morning sun, visible from every quarter of the city. Inside, priests perform sacrifices according to rituals unchanged for centuries. The examination of entrails, the pouring of libations, the precise recitation of formulae, where a single misspoken word demands the entire ceremony begin again. Roman state religion is not a matter of personal belief. It is a contract between the community and its gods, maintained through correct practice, and the reward is not salvation, but civic prosperity. Yet beneath this official architecture of worship, other currents move. In underground chambers carved from the tufa rock beneath Roman streets, small groups of men gather in narrow vaulted rooms lit by oil lamps. The walls bear painted reliefs of a young god in a Phrygian cap, plunging a dagger into the throat of a bull. This is Mithras, a deity whose worship spreads through the legions and the merchant classes during the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era. Mithraea appear from the Rhine frontier to the ports of Ostia, intimate spaces seating perhaps 30 initiates on stone benches, progressing through 7 grades of initiation. The cult offers what state religion does not: personal transformation, a sense of belonging, cosmic meaning. Mithras is not alone. The cult of Isis, imported from Egypt, promises devotees a relationship with a compassionate mother goddess who has conquered death itself. The worship of Cybele, the great mother from Anatolia, involves ecstatic rites and a professional priesthood. These mystery cults flourish precisely because the empire's roads and trade networks carry ideas as efficiently as they carry grain and marble. Among these competing faiths, one emerges from the most unlikely origins. In the province of Judea, sometime around the year 30 of the Common Era, the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate orders the crucifixion of a Jewish preacher from Galilee. The execution is unremarkable by imperial standards. Rome crucifies thousands. But within decades, communities of followers spread across the eastern Mediterranean, carried by missionaries like Paul of Tarsus, a Roman citizen who travels from Antioch to Corinth to Rome itself, establishing congregations in private homes. Christianity offers something no mystery cult matches: universal admission regardless of sex, status, or ethnicity, and a narrative of resurrection that transforms Roman execution into divine victory. In the garrison town of Dura Europos on the Euphrates, a modest house is converted into a church around 230 of the Common Era. Its walls bear frescoes of miracles and baptism, among the earliest Christian art yet discovered. The Roman state notices. After the Great Fire of 64, Nero targets Christians as scapegoats, but persecution remains sporadic and local for generations. Around 112 of the Common Era, Pliny the Younger, governing Bithynia, writes to Emperor Trajan asking how to handle accused Christians. Trajan's reply is pragmatic: do not seek them out, but punish those who refuse to sacrifice to the gods when formally accused. The exchange reveals an empire uncertain how to categorize a faith that refuses participation in the civic religious order. By the middle of the 3rd century, Christian communities exist in every major city of the empire. Bishops administer congregations, maintain charitable networks, and correspond across provincial boundaries. The catacombs beneath Rome, miles of tunnels carved through soft volcanic rock, hold not only burials but frescoed chambers depicting fish, shepherds, and anchors, the coded visual language of a faith still operating at the margins of imperial tolerance. The old gods still stand in their temples. The mystery cults still initiate their devotees in underground chambers. But something has shifted in the spiritual geography of the empire, quietly and irreversibly. The death of Marcus Aurelius on the 17th of March, 180 of the Common Era, closes an age. The philosopher-emperor breathes his last in a military camp along the Danube frontier, and the purple passes to his son Commodus, a young man of 18 with no taste for philosophy and no patience for governance. For the first time in nearly a century, succession follows blood rather than merit, and the consequences are immediate. Commodus abandons the Danubian campaigns his father spent years prosecuting. He returns to Rome and surrenders himself to spectacle. The emperor enters the arena of the Colosseum dressed as Hercules, draped in a lion skin, wielding a club, fighting against animals and carefully matched gladiators in bouts designed to ensure his victory. He renames the months of the calendar after his own titles. He renames Rome itself Colonia Commodiana. The Senate endures these humiliations in silence until the last night of 192, when a conspiracy of his inner circle ends his reign by strangulation. The empire convulses. 5 men claim the throne in a single year. The Praetorian Guard auctions the purple to the senator Didius Julianus, who holds it for 66 days before Septimius Severus marches his Danubian legions into Rome and seizes power. Severus rules with iron competence for 18 years, expanding the army, raising legionary pay, and fortifying the frontiers. His deathbed advice to his sons reportedly distills the new political reality into its essence: enrich the soldiers and ignore everyone else. The Severan dynasty endures until 235, producing the remarkable Constitutio Antoniniana of 212 under Caracalla, which extends Roman citizenship to virtually all free inhabitants of the empire. The massive baths of Caracalla, completed in 216, rise in southern Rome as monuments of brick-faced concrete and marble veneer, their vaulted halls capable of accommodating 1,600 bathers simultaneously. Yet these grand gestures mask deepening fractures. When the last Severan emperor, Alexander Severus, falls to mutinous soldiers in 235, the empire enters its most catastrophic half-century. Between 235 and 284, over 26 men claim imperial authority. Most die violently within months. The frontiers buckle simultaneously. Germanic peoples press across the Rhine and Danube. The resurgent Sasanian Persian Empire strikes from the east, and in 260, the unthinkable occurs. Emperor Valerian, leading a campaign against the Sasanian king Shapur I, is captured at the Battle of Edessa. A Roman emperor becomes a foreign prisoner, paraded in chains, never to return. The empire splinters. In the west, the commander Postumus establishes the breakaway Gallic Empire, governing Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania as a separate state. In the east, the desert city of Palmyra, its colonnaded streets gleaming with Corinthian capitals, asserts its own authority under Odenathus and then his widow Zenobia, controlling Syria, Egypt, and much of Asia Minor. The silver denarius, once a reliable coin of nearly pure metal, is debased until it contains barely 5% silver, its surface washed with a thin coating that wears away to reveal the bronze beneath. Trade contracts. Cities that once sprawled beyond their walls now retreat behind hastily constructed fortifications built from demolished temples and tombstones. The plague of Cyprian, beginning around 249, sweeps through provinces already weakened by war, killing thousands daily in Rome alone at its peak. The empire that once seemed eternal now appears to be dying, its body politic fractured into rival states, its currency worthless, its borders permeable, its population diminished by disease and violence. The structures remain, the roads still stretch toward distant horizons, but the system that maintained them strains toward a breaking point from which recovery, if it comes at all, will demand transformation so radical that the empire emerging from this crucible will scarcely resemble the one that entered it. The transformation arrives not as gradual healing, but as the iron grip of a single will. In the year 284 of the Common Era, a Dalmatian soldier named Diocles, commander of the imperial bodyguard, seizes power after the mysterious death of Emperor Numerian. He takes the name Diocletian, and within months he eliminates his rival Carinus at the Battle of the Margus. The empire that nearly dissolved into fragments now passes into the hands of a man who understands that the old system is dead and that survival demands reinvention on a scale Rome has never attempted. The solution is architectural in its logic. In 286, Diocletian elevates a fellow officer, Maximian, to the rank of co-Augustus, assigning him the western provinces while retaining the east for himself. 7 years later, in 293, the structure doubles again. 2 junior emperors bearing the title Caesar join the arrangement, Galerius under Diocletian in the east, Constantius Chlorus under Maximian in the west. This is the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4, and its genius lies in distributing the impossible burden of defending frontiers stretching from Hadrian's Wall to the Euphrates. 4 courts, 4 armies, 4 capitals, Nicomedia, Sirmium, Mediolanum, Augusta Treverorum, none of them Rome itself. The administrative map is redrawn entirely. The old provinces, some vast enough to serve as power bases for usurpers, are subdivided ruthlessly. The empire now contains over 100 provinces grouped into 12 dioceses, each governed by a vicarius answerable to the tetrarchs. Layers of bureaucracy multiply. The separation of military and civil authority within provinces ensures that no single governor commands both troops and taxes. It is governance by fragmentation, designed to prevent the very concentrations of power that produced 50 years of civil war. Tetrarchic portrait sculpture captures this ideology in stone. The famous Porphyry group, now embedded in the corner of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, depicts 4 identical figures embracing, their faces blocky and abstracted, stripped of individual identity. They are not men, but offices, interchangeable pillars of a system meant to outlast any single life. The economic crisis demands equally radical measures. Diocletian reforms the coinage, introducing new gold and silver denominations. When inflation persists, he issues the edict on maximum prices in 301, an extraordinary document listing over 1,000 commodities and services with fixed price ceilings, from a pound of pork to a day's wages for a wall painter. Inscribed on stone tablets erected across eastern provinces, the edict attempts to freeze an economy in motion. It fails. Merchants hoard goods or refuse to sell. The tablets become monuments to the limits of imperial command over market forces. Along the eastern frontier, the Strata Diocletiana rises, a fortified road stretching from Damascus towards the Euphrates, studded with watchtowers and garrison forts, its stones baking under the Syrian sun. The northern borders receive similar attention, with new fortifications along the Rhine and Danube rebuilt in the heavy, squat style of late Roman military architecture. Then comes the persecution. In February of 303, Diocletian issues the first of 4 edicts against Christians. Churches are demolished, scriptures are burned, clergy are imprisoned. In the eastern provinces, where enforcement is harshest under Galerius, believers face execution. It is the most systematic attempt to eradicate Christianity the empire has ever undertaken, and it will prove to be the last. In 305, Diocletian does something no Roman emperor has done voluntarily. He abdicates, compelling Maximian to do the same. He retires to an enormous fortified palace on the Dalmatian coast at Spalatum, its peristyle court lined with granite columns, its walls enclosing temples, apartments, and a mausoleum built for a living man. The palace is a city in miniature, a monument to the emperor who saved the empire by remaking it into something its founders would not recognize. The tetrarchy he designed begins to fracture almost immediately, but the administrative and military structures he created endure, forming the skeleton upon which the next century will build. The fractures spread with the speed of ambition. Within a year of Diocletian's abdication, 6 men claim imperial authority, and the careful geometry of the tetrarchy dissolves into civil war. In the far northwest, in Eboracum, the legionary fortress in Britannia where cold rain falls on stone barracks, the troops proclaim Flavius Valerius Constantinus as Augustus on the 25th of July, 306. He is the son of Constantius Chlorus, who has just died in that same garrison town, and the soldiers who raise him on their shields care nothing for tetrarchic succession rules. They want a leader, they know. 6 years of maneuvering follow. Constantine consolidates control over Gaul and Britannia, builds loyalty among his legions, and watches as rivals destroy one another across the Mediterranean. By 312, the contest for the Western Empire narrows to 2 men, Constantine and Maxentius, who holds Rome itself. In October, Constantine marches south through Italy with approximately 40,000 troops. The decisive confrontation comes at the Milvian Bridge over the Tiber, just north of Rome, on the 28th of October. Ancient sources record that Constantine orders his soldiers to mark their shields with a Christian symbol before battle. Maxentius, trusting in numbers and fortifications, crosses the river to meet the attack. His forces break. The pontoon bridge collapses beneath retreating soldiers, and Maxentius drowns in the Tiber's brown current. Constantine enters Rome as sole master of the West. The consequences reshape civilization. In February of 313, Constantine and his eastern counterpart Licinius issue the agreement known as the Edict of Milan, granting legal toleration to Christianity and all religions throughout the empire. Churches confiscated during the Great Persecution are restored. Christian clergy receive tax exemptions. Imperial funds flow toward the construction of basilicas, including the great church rising over the Vatican Hill, where tradition places the burial of the Apostle Peter. Its 5 aisles stretch over 100 meters long, its timber roof spanning a nave flooded with light from clear-story windows. Constantine defeats Licinius in 324, becoming sole emperor. The following year, he convenes approximately 300 bishops at the city of Nicaea in Bithynia for the First Ecumenical Council. The gathering addresses the Arian controversy over the nature of Christ and produces the Nicene Creed, a statement of orthodox belief that remains foundational to Christianity. The emperor who presides over these theological deliberations is not yet baptized himself, a detail that reveals the complex entanglement of political power and religious conviction. On the 11th of May, 330, Constantine dedicates his greatest monument, a new imperial capital on the site of the ancient Greek colony of Byzantium, at the narrow strait of the Bosphorus where Europe meets Asia. Constantinople rises on 7 hills echoing Rome's own topography. Massive walls protect a triangular peninsula. A new forum, a hippodrome modeled on the Circus Maximus, a senate house, and imperial palaces fill the urban core. The city commands the trade routes between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, between the grain of Egypt and the armies of the Danube. It is positioned with strategic genius, defensible by sea on 2 sides, and it will endure as a capital for over 11 centuries. In Rome, the triumphal arch erected near the Colosseum to celebrate the Milvian Bridge victory stands clad in marble reliefs recycled from monuments of Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, as though Constantine claims the authority of all previous golden ages. The new Constantinian sculptures are smaller, more rigid, their figures staring forward with enormous eyes. Something has shifted in how power represents itself. Constantine receives baptism only on his deathbed, in May of 337, at a villa near Nicomedia. His body is carried to Constantinople and laid in the Church of the Holy Apostles, his sarcophagus surrounded by 12 cenotaphs representing the apostles, the emperor positioned symbolically as the 13th. The colossal marble head that survives in Rome, with its vast upward-gazing eyes and smooth, idealized features, captures something essential about this transformation. The face belongs neither to the naturalistic tradition of republican portraiture nor to the divine serenity of classical gods. It is something new entirely, the face of an empire turning its gaze from earth toward heaven. The sons of Constantine divide the empire among themselves, and within 13 years, 2 are dead. Constantius II survives, ruling from Constantinople, his court thick with eunuchs and bishops locked in furious theological dispute. The Arian controversy that the Council of Nicaea attempted to settle in 325 now fractures the Church into warring camps. Constantius favors the Arian position, and bishops are exiled, recalled, exiled again, their sees traded like military postings. The empire that has embraced Christianity discovers that a single faith can generate infinite division. Then, in 361, a young man raised in enforced seclusion and educated in the philosophy of Athens ascends the throne. Julian, nephew of Constantine, has survived the massacre of his relatives only through obscurity. He has studied Plato, Homer, the Neoplatonists, and in secret he has turned from Christianity back to the old gods. As emperor, he reopens pagan temples, restores their revenues, and strips Christian clergy of their privileges. He writes philosophical treatises and performs animal sacrifices with his own hands, the blood staining his imperial purple. The Christian writers who record his reign call him the apostate. Julian's restoration proves brief. In June of 363, during an ambitious campaign against the Sasanian Empire deep in Mesopotamia, a spear strikes him in the abdomen. He dies in his tent along the banks of the Tigris, 31 years old, and the pagan revival dies with him. His successor Jovian, a Christian officer, immediately restores the church's position. The old temples fall silent again. The frontier, meanwhile, bears a pressure that no theology can answer. In 376, tens of thousands of Gothic refugees appear on the northern bank of the Danube, fleeing the westward advance of the Huns across the Central Asian steppe. Emperor Valens permits them to cross into imperial territory, but Roman officials exploit and starve the newcomers. The Goths revolt. On the 9th of August, 378, outside the city of Adrianople in Thrace, Gothic cavalry smashes the Roman left flank and encircles the imperial infantry. 2/3 of the eastern field army perishes in the dust. Valens himself falls, his body never recovered. It is the worst Roman military disaster since Cannae, nearly 6 centuries earlier. The task of reconstruction falls to Theodosius, a Spanish-born general elevated to the eastern throne in 379. He settles the Goths within the empire as federates, autonomous warriors under their own leaders who fight for Rome, but answer to their own chiefs. It is a pragmatic solution and a dangerous precedent. Theodosius also moves decisively on religion. The Edict of Thessalonica, issued on the 27th of February, 380, declares Nicene Christianity the sole legitimate faith of the Roman state. Heretics and pagans face legal penalties. In 391, the Serapeum in Alexandria, one of the ancient world's great temples, is demolished by Christian mobs with imperial sanction. Its massive columns topple. The cult statue of Serapis, centuries old, is hacked apart. Great basilica churches rise across the empire, their long naves and semicircular apses replacing the rectangular cellar of pagan worship. The architectural language shifts from the temple's exterior grandeur to the basilica's interior mystery, walls shimmering with mosaic and candlelight. Bishops assume civic authority alongside governors. The institutional skeleton of the empire begins to carry Christian flesh. Theodosius is the last emperor to rule both halves as one. Upon his death on the 17th of January, 395, the empire passes to his 2 sons. Arcadius receives the east, governing from Constantinople. Honorius, barely 10 years old, inherits the west, his court eventually settling in the marshland refuge of Ravenna. No formal act of division is proclaimed. The assumption is that the empire remains unified under two courts, but the administrative separation hardens into permanence. Two bureaucracies, two armies, two treasuries drift apart like continents. The Western court grows weaker, its revenues shrinking, its military increasingly dependent on Germanic federates whose loyalty runs to their own war leaders. The Eastern court, richer and more urbanized, consolidates behind the triple walls of Constantinople. The empire that once moved as a single body now breathes with two separate sets of lungs, and one of them is already laboring. The western lung falters first in the provinces farthest from the heart. In the year 395 of the Common Era, the general Stilicho, half Vandal by birth, and the most capable military mind the Western court possesses, holds the frontier together through force of will and diplomatic cunning. But the pressures are relentless. On the last night of December 406, the Rhine freezes solid, and a mass of Vandals, Alans, and Suebi crosses into Gaul. The frontier that Rome maintained for 4 centuries dissolves in a single winter night. Gaul burns. Cities that have known peace for generations watch Germanic war bands move through their streets. In Britain, the legions grow restless. A succession of usurpers rises among the island garrison. The last of them, Constantine III, crossing to Gaul in 407 to claim imperial authority. The remaining Roman administration in Britain collapses. By 410, the Emperor Honorius, besieged by crises on every front, sends word to the British cities that they must see to their own defense. Rome's northernmost province slips away without a final battle, without a formal decree of abandonment, simply the silence of letters that stop arriving. But it is Italy itself that suffers the wound no Roman thought possible. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, has spent years maneuvering between the eastern and western courts, demanding land and recognition for his people. Twice he invades Italy. Twice Stilicho turns him back. Then, in 408, Stilicho is executed by Honorius's court on charges of treason, and the one man capable of negotiating with or defeating Alaric is gone. The western court retreats behind the marshes of Ravenna. Alaric marches on Rome. He besieges the city 3 times across 2 years, strangling its grain supply from the port of Ostia. Famine stalks the streets. On the 24th of August, 410, someone opens the Salarian Gate. Visigothic warriors pour into the city that has not fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years. The sack lasts 3 days. Churches are largely spared. Alaric is a Christian, an Arian, but the great houses of the Aventine and Caelian hills are stripped of their gold and silver. Bronze tiles vanish from temple roofs. Refugees stream south along the Via Appia, carrying what they can. The material damage, though severe, is not total. Rome's population has already declined from its imperial peak. The symbolic devastation is immeasurable. Across the Mediterranean, the news lands like a thunderclap. Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, declares that the light of the world has been extinguished. Pagans blame the abandonment of the old gods. Christians struggle to explain why the Christian God permitted such catastrophe. Alaric himself dies weeks later, near Cosenza in southern Italy. His followers reportedly divert a river, bury him in the riverbed with his treasures, then restore the waters and kill the laborers who dug the grave. The Visigoths move on, eventually settling in southwestern Gaul and Spain. The aftershocks continue. Vandals and Alans push through Iberia and cross the Strait of Gibraltar into Roman Africa in 429, led by Gaiseric. Within a decade, they seize Carthage, Rome's ancient rival reborn as a Germanic kingdom, controlling the grain supply of the western Mediterranean. In Hippo Regius, the aging bishop Augustine lies dying as Vandal forces besiege his city in 430. His great work, The City of God, begun in 413 as a direct response to the sack, reframes history itself. The earthly city falls, Augustine argues, because all earthly cities must fall. Only the city of God endures beyond the reach of barbarian swords and burning rooftops. It is a theology born from rubble, and it will shape Western thought for 1,000 years. The Western Empire does not die in a single stroke. It is dismantled piece by piece across 4 decades of diminishing sovereignty, until the title of emperor itself becomes a hollow ornament worn by boys and puppets at the pleasure of Germanic warlords. Through the 430s and 440s, the general Aetius holds together what remains. He is the last Roman commander of genuine strategic brilliance, a man who spent his youth as a hostage among the Huns and understands their ways intimately. He plays barbarian factions against one another, using Hunnic mercenaries to check Visigoths, Burgundians to balance Franks, maintaining a fragile equilibrium across Gaul through diplomacy backed by borrowed swords. But the territories he defends shrink with each passing year. Britain is gone entirely. Spain belongs to Suevi and Visigoths. Africa's grain flows into Vandal coffers. Then Attila turns west. The Hunnic king, who has extorted vast tribute from Constantinople and ravaged the Balkans, crosses the Rhine in the spring of 451 with an army drawn from subject peoples across the Eurasian steppe and the Germanic frontier. The column stretches for miles, Hunnic horse archers, Ostrogothic infantry, Gepid lancers, sweeping through northern Gaul, burning Metz, threatening Orleans. Aetius assembles a coalition as desperate as it is improbable. Roman regulars, Visigothic cavalry under King Theodoric, Frankish and Burgundian warriors. They meet Attila on the Catalonian plains near Chalons in June. The battle rages across rolling farmland, slick with blood. Theodoric falls in the fighting, but the Allied line holds. Attila withdraws, the first and only significant defeat of his career. It is the last great Roman victory in the West. The following year, Attila invades Italy itself, sacking Aquileia so thoroughly that survivors flee into the lagoons that will one day become Venice. His army moves down the Po Valley, taking Mediolanum and Ticinum. Near the Mincio River, Pope Leo I rides out to meet the Hunnic king. Whatever passes between them, persuasion, bribery, the threat of plague ravaging Attila's forces, or perhaps all three, the Huns withdraw from Italy. Attila dies the next year, in 453, of a hemorrhage on his wedding night, and his empire shatters overnight as subject peoples revolt. But Aetius does not survive to rebuild. Emperor Valentinian III, jealous and fearful, murders his greatest general with his own hands in September of 454. Within months, Valentinian himself is assassinated by Aetius's loyalists. The throne passes to Petronius Maximus, who lasts 77 days before a Vandal fleet under Gaiseric arrives at Ostia. For 14 days in June of 455, the Vandals systematically strip Rome of its remaining treasures. Bronze roof tiles from the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, golden vessels looted from Jerusalem's temple centuries before, thousands of captives including the empress and her daughters. After 455, the Western emperors are shadows. Ricimer, a Germanic general of mixed Visigothic and Suevic blood, becomes the true power, installing and deposing emperors at will. Majorian, the one ruler who attempts genuine reconquest, is betrayed and executed in 461. Ricimer cycles through Libius Severus, Anthemius, Olybrius, names that blur into irrelevance. When Ricimer dies in 472, the pattern continues under new hands. The imperial residence at Ravenna, protected by its marshes, gleams with extraordinary mosaics, tessellated saints and emperors in gold and lapis blue adorning chapel walls, even as the authority radiating from those halls extends barely beyond the city gates. In 475, the general Orestes places his teenage son on the throne. The boy's name carries an almost cruel irony: Romulus Augustulus, a diminutive echo of both Rome's legendary founder and its first emperor. On the 4th of September, 476, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, commanding a coalition of Heruli, Syrian, and Torsalingi soldiers demanding land in Italy, deposes the boy without violence. There is no battle, no dramatic last stand. Romulus Augustulus is granted a pension and sent to a villa in Campania. Odoacer gathers the imperial purple robes, the diadem, and the regalia, and ships them east to Constantinople, informing Emperor Zeno that the West requires no emperor of its own. The gesture is both pragmatic and final. The Western Roman Empire ends not with a thunderclap, but with a package sent across the sea. Yet the package sent across the sea arrives at a capital that does not mourn. Constantinople thrives. The Eastern Roman Empire, governed from the city Constantine raised on the Bosphorus, continues without interruption, its administration intact, its armies defending frontiers from the Danube to the Euphrates. The Senate still convenes. The law still speaks Latin in its codes, even as Greek becomes the language of the court and the street. The empire that the modern world will call Byzantine never uses that name for itself. Its citizens call themselves Romaioi, Romans, and they mean it. In the year 529, the Emperor Justinian commissions the most ambitious legal project in history. Teams of jurists under Tribonian gather, organize, and codify nearly a millennium of Roman legal thought into the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law. Completed by 534, it preserves the principles of contract, property, due process, and individual rights that Roman jurists refined across centuries. This codification will sleep in monastery libraries through the early medieval period, then reawaken in the 11th century when scholars at Bologna rediscover it, igniting a legal revolution that shapes the civil law systems of continental Europe and, through them, the legal frameworks of Latin America, East Asia, and much of Africa. Meanwhile, Latin refuses to die. It fractures slowly, beautifully, across the former Western provinces. In Gaul, soldiers' Latin and local speech merge into Old French. On the Iberian Peninsula, regional variants crystallize into Castilian, Portuguese, Catalan. In the Italian peninsula itself, Dante will eventually forge Tuscan vernacular into literary art, but the bones beneath remain Roman. Romanian preserves Latin east of the Adriatic, a linguistic island surrounded by Slavic tongues, testimony to Trajan's colonization of Dacia 8 centuries before the Western Empire falls. In Rome itself, the bishop inherits the city. The Roman Catholic Church adopts imperial administrative structures. Diocese is named after Diocletian's reforms, a papal curia modeled on imperial bureaucracy, Latin as the sacred and scholarly language of Western Christendom for over 1,000 years. Monks in candlelit scriptoria at Monte Cassino, Bobbio, and Lindisfarne copy Virgil, Cicero, Livy, and Seneca onto vellum, preserving the intellectual heritage of a vanished state. The Hagia Sophia rises in Constantinople under Justinian's patronage, its dome spanning 31 meters, a cathedral that will serve as the heart of Eastern Christendom for 916 years until the Ottoman conquest of 1453. When that city falls to Sultan Mehmed II on the 29th of May, Greek scholars flee westward carrying manuscripts, and the Renaissance already underway in Florence accelerates. Brunelleschi studies the Pantheon's unreinforced concrete dome to engineer his own miracle atop the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. Palladio measures Roman temples and codifies their proportions into an architectural language that will cross the Atlantic to shape the United States Capitol and courthouses in every state. The vocabulary of governance itself remains Roman. Republic, Senate, Constitution, citizen, legislature, veto, dictator, candidate. Each word carries the DNA of Roman political experience. Every modern democracy that separates powers, codifies law, and extends citizenship beyond ethnic boundaries walks a path Romans cleared, however imperfectly, over 2 millennia ago. The Forum Romanum stands quiet at dawn. Columns of grey granite and white marble rise from excavated earth, casting long shadows across paving stones worn smooth by generations beyond counting. The civilization that built them is gone. Its language lives in every Romance tongue, its law in every civil code, its engineering in every arch and dome, its political imagination in every republic on earth. Rome did not fall so much as it dissolved into the foundations of everything that followed. Thank you for journeying through the complete story of Rome, from the humble huts on the Palatine to the eternal legacy that still shapes the modern world. If this series has brought the past alive for you, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new voyage into history.